There's been like a lot of Raiden drama recently. A lot of people are arguing if she need a buff or not. A lot of people are arguing if she's like good or not. And from a perspective of mine, this is gonna be a interesting take. I actually think she doesn't need a buff. And I think that's really interesting to hear from a lot of people. I think a lot of you might not be expecting it because I am one of the people who do call Raiden not being that good and point out a lot of her issues. So it might be really interesting to hear that I'm saying Raiden doesn't need a buff. What I do think, however, is the Raiden-Beidou interaction needed to be fixed. And that's all there is needed to be do. As long as Raiden can work with Beidou, she will be a good character with even greater future potential. That's all I think needed to be done. She doesn't need to buff, she doesn't need changes, Electro doesn't need changes, Electro is fine. All they need to do is fix the Raiden-Beidou interaction. Alright, just like every other content creator, I'm gonna waste 2 minutes of your time explaining the issues. But essentially, Beidou Elemental Burst don't trigger during Raiden Elemental Burst, while something else like Xingqiu does, even though they all have very similar wording. So for example, Xingqiu say when your normal attack hits, or when it just say when you normal attack, it will trigger her rain sword. And similarly on Raiden C6, it say that attack by normal attack will do whatever this decreased cooldown is. Now of course they changed the wording on her C6, but before that it used to say her normal attack will decrease party member cooldown, which in my opinion is a really scummy move to change it. I mean, they acknowledge the wording is inconsistent, but instead of fixing it to do what everyone expected to actually do, they just decided to change the description to match the problem, which obviously doesn't solve anything. Anyway, Beidou Elemental Burst say that when normal and charged attack hit, so the common explanation of why Beidou Elemental Burst doesn't work is that it requires you to do normal attack damage. Now this is the point where I want to call it out that this is just a theory. There's no confirmation that is indeed the case. All it say is that your normal and charge attack hits. It doesn't indicate anywhere that you need to do damage with your normal attack. So the common explanation is that, oh, Raiden do elemental burst damage, not normal attack damage, so therefore it doesn't work. But there's no indicator at all that you need to do normal attack to begin with. All it say is that you have to hit it, which indicate you have to connect the attack, but not actually to do damage. A primary example of this is actually Beidou Elemental Burst can actually proc on shield. As you might know, shield would prevent damage from being taken on enemy, for example like on Abyss Mages. So in that case, you don't do normal attack damage, you do poise damage, which is what breaking the shield, right? But your normal attack still connects, so your normal attack hits on the shield and thus it triggered the Beidou Elemental Burst. There's a couple of stuff I want to talk about today. For example, very commonly people like to think, oh, Electro really need a buff, Electro is the worst element right now. But I actually think those statements are incorrect. Does Electro character sucks? No, that's not true at all, because Beidou exists and Beidou is one of the strongest characters in the game. You might have seen people rating Beidou super high to be even one of the top 5 DPS in the game. And in my opinion, as a Fear Crafter, I definitely think that's true. Beidou Elemental Burst is definitely one of the strongest in the game. What you have to understand about Electro characters is that they are characters who do not rely on Electro reaction to do damage. Beidou Elemental Burst don't care about the reaction at all. It doesn't matter if Beidou Elemental Burst don't have any reaction, so still be a really good character. Similarly, on other Electro characters like Keqing, Keqing is not a character who rely on Electro reaction to do any kind of damage. Keqing damage comes from the fact that she have a high scaling charge attack. In fact, that's pretty much the identity of Electro characters, is that they have high scaling attack that are just really high ratio and therefore don't require Electro reaction at all. Similarly, like Xiao doesn't have a amplifying reaction like Cryo or Pyro does, but he's still a really good character simply because he have high ratio and that's all you need. You don't need amplifying reaction, you just need high ratio, which character like Beidou, Keqing does have. And of course, with Beidou being the backbone of Electro, Raiden not working with Beidou pretty much just killed this entire combo, and it's the true reason why she's not that good, because Electro character is dependent on building a Beidou comp, and Raiden just doesn't function. And a very common misconception is, oh, maybe characters shouldn't be dependent on strictly one other character to be good. But you have to realize that how every single character in the game works right now. Every single character in the game have a stable pairing. Alright, the Luke, you have seen choose. Xiangling, you have seen choose, and arguably Child. Yoimiya, you have seen choose. Hu Tao, you have seen choose. Every single Pyro TPS is dependent on seeing choose, but nobody complained that, oh, Pyro DPS is bad because they depend on seeing choose. It's a much stricter pairing than like any other pairing in the game, but it's not like anybody complained like, oh my god, Pyro DPS are so bad. They're always so dependent on seeing choose. Everyone always praise how good Pyro DPS is, but in reality, seeing choose is doing all the carrying. Similarly, crowd DPS like Ganyu in Morgana team or Ayaka are dependent on like extreme cryo battery like Diona. Like every single cryo team run Diona because Diona is just so good. Diona once again single-handedly is carrying all the cryo team. More examples are like this. Xiao is dependent on Sucrose pretty much. You always do Xiao Sucrose pairing. But again, nobody complained about it because Sucrose is not a contested support. So this pairing is a stable pairing, but nobody go like, ah, Xiao needs Sucrose to work. She's such a bad character, right? Having a stable pairing is not necessarily a bad thing. Every single character in the game work like this. I think what people don't realize is that the element on a character actually affect their power level a lot less than people think. If Bennett was an Electro character, what would that change? Would that really dethrone him from being the best character in the game? Probably not, because he would still be able to provide insane healing and insane attack buff. So Bennett being Electro doesn't really change anything about him. Does Zhongli being a different element than Geo change anything about him? Honestly, again, not really. It will change little thing here and there, but the biggest value of Zhongli is that he provide you a super big shield. If Zhongli was like Pyro, he would still provide you with that super big shield and you would still use him. Obviously, you won't be able to do double Geo pairing anymore, but you can do double Pyro pairing, so you know, it's just give and take. Overall, how good of a character is not directly tied to their element. It's just tied to what their kit do and what their kit does. There is obviously Pyro character that is garbage. There's crowd character that is garbage. There's Hydro character that is garbage. There's bad character in every single element. In fact, if we take a look at Geo character like Noah or Ningguang, these characters are incapable of doing any kind of elemental reaction at all. Crystallize is not a real reaction, but people don't complain like, oh my god, Ningguang is Geo, she's such a bad DPS. People don't complain like, oh my god, Noelle is Geo, she's such a bad DPS. In fact, it's really interesting to see because I think for most high-end video crafter, they actually agreed that Geo is the worst element in the game, not Electro. I think the high-end video crafter would actually agree that Geo is actually the worst element in the game. This might be very surprising to hear, and a lot of you might be very confused because Geo Resonance is so good, but Geo Resonance is only so good because Zhongli is so good, so it's entirely being carried by Zhongli. I think commonly like people complain about the elemental resonance of Electro being useless, but what you guys have to realize is that Hydro have a more useless resonance, and it's really surprising to me like, oh, people go and complain like Electro resonance is the bad, oh, it's the worst in the game when Hydro resonance exists. basically feel like to me that people are cherry picking problem, but not addressing the actual thing. Is that overall there are some resonance that are pretty bad. Like Hydro is really bad. The any 4 unique element is basically completely useless as well. Electro on the other hand, it's arguably somewhat useful because once again, character like Beidou have a really high cost on their elemental burst, right? And with Beidou being a bare bone and double Electro being a stable pairing, the high voltage Electro resonance is actually not as useless as people think. But I will have to agree with the complaint that Ball is a little bit Constellation locked, arguably her Constellation 2. Her Constellation 2 is just way too powerful, and it's not really fair that they put such a powerful Constellation very early in the Constellation tree to quote-unquote bait people into welling for it. Oh no, another one of them asks, is C2 Raiden pulling for it? And that's exactly what I'm telling you guys. The strategy from MiHoYo is working. Fin line. It's like what I say when someone come and ask me if Constellation 2 is worth. Do I give in and say it's kind of worth if you are willing to pay for it? And that's exactly the MiHoYo trap. You're falling into MiHoYo trap of, oh god, Constellation 2 is so big, I want to pull for it. So now that you have Constellation 2, you're like, damn, I'm only 1 away from Constellation 3, and I already spent $1,000. What's another $200, $300? So now you pull for Constellation 3. This entire Constellation 2, ignore 60% defense, is such a scummy move by MiHoYo that I can't believe they actually balance around Constellation 2. Not even Constellation 1. It's like they look at Hu Tao and they'd be like, damn, Hu Tao C1 is so good, and so many people are willing to pull for C1 when Hu Tao came out. Similarly, like Ganyu C1 was so good, and it's arguably worth pulling as a Dolphin player, so people would pull for it, right? So they're like, okay, what if we push that to C2 instead? But for a bigger effect. Like, come on. This is MiHoYo trap. Currently, on the Chinese side of things, I think majority of the player actually have Constellation 2 or even Constellation 3, and then they also have Inkglyph Lightning. So to them, their Raiden is perfectly fine and is really good because they have extremely powerful Constellation. But for free-to-play player who doesn't have the luxury of using the Inkglyph Lightning polearm and are using C0 Constellation Raiden, their experience is going to be dramatically different than other player. In fact, you can even say that Raiden is actually the first 6-star character in the game because you need to pull for Constellation 2. So she's like a 6-star character, aka you have to spend more to get the complete product. And when you do, she's pretty good. Overall, this is not to say like, Raiden doesn't have any issues as Gaul, why are you guys complaining for a buff? I do think that she have a lot of issues similar to my previous video that I just released, but I just don't think it is as big as people make it out to be. She can definitely still work in some scenario and she can definitely still do fine. She might be a very mediocre or even slightly below average character, but it's not like she's unplayable, and I feel like that's something I have to address. Again, this is coming from someone who called out Raiden for being bad, calling out Raiden issues. So I hope I'm not too sugarcoating here or anything like that. Overall, I just think people are barking up the wrong tree. Is Electro in need of a buff? I think a buff would be nice to have, but people act like Electro is unplayable, Raiden is completely garbage, and she really need a buff. And I don't think that's necessarily true at all. And that's pretty much what I want to address, simply because I think people have too many misconceptions of what is actually good and what is actually like garbage. With that being said, the way I would like to see the buffing Raiden, if aside from just fixing the Beidou issues, and they do decide to buff Raiden, is that I would actually like to see them fully emphasizing on the energy recharge mechanic, which will make her a universal battery support for almost every single character in the game. And I think that's totally fine. maybe it'll push her a little bit toward the really good category, like 4 out of 5. And I think that's fine as a character. It really feel that niche really well. Specifically on her elemental burst, Mushan Sintetsu, I would like to see them generating a percentage amount of energy for other characters. So right now it generates 20 to 25 flat energy, and that's just way too little. But if it generated like something like 40 to 50 flat energy, it'll be way too much for a character that are low on their energy requirement, like Fenty or Kazu. So what I would like to see is the elemental burst would generate a percentage amount of energy according to other character. So for a Beidou, it will generate more because Beidou have a higher cost than other character. For a character with lower cost, like I think it's gonna be the Luke, then it'll have a lower cost, so you cannot just slam like 4 40 cost character or like a bunch of 60 cost character and just press Q. You will still have to draft a comp around it because you still have some energy issues. But Raiden would solve a lot of the energy issues that currently introduced in many teams like Eula, maybe even Xiao or something like that. This video ended up being slightly longer than I thought it would be, but I think it's very important to address something like this. And so I hope you guys really learn something about it and think about it. And of course, as always, comment about your thoughts and like, subscribe, and I'll see you all next time. Skyward Harp! Nope. Okay, this next one. Skyward Harp right here. Oh, Kuching is okay. Kuching is okay. Oh! I got it! This is my first Kuching. It's my first Kuching. My first Kuching. Oh my goodness.